Good evening, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. My name is Emily Burks, and I am delighted to be your host this evening as we explore Edinburgh with a very special guest. And now, without further ado, let's go to Edinburgh. I am so excited to introduce our guide for this evening. She is a Rick Steves Scotland guide, a certified yoga teacher, an insatiable hiker, and a ski instructor and a hot air balloon pilot, just to name a few of her titles. It's Charlie Rawson.
Hello and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. It's wonderful to be on here.
Well, we are so happy to have you, Charlie. And where are you in the world this evening?
So I am in North Somerset. So this is where I reside typically in the winter. So it's the land of cheese and cider if you ever find yourself around here.
Well, that sounds very enticing. And Charlie, you are a Rick Steves Scotland guide, so you just recently finished your 2024 tour season. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started guiding with Rick Steves and maybe some highlights from this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started guiding for Rick Steves Europe back in 2018. That's when I joined the company. And that's actually when we had just one 10-day tour up in Scotland. Now, of course, we've got the 13 and the 8-day. And I really love the fact that we've been able to include Glasgow and extend that 10-day to be the 13. And then equally give folks who've got less time the opportunity to come over and do the 8-day tour. As for highlights, crikey, this year has just been fantastic. One moment that really sticks with me is we were driving along on the coach through Highland Perthshire, and there was a rainbow in the sky, and it was so dense. It was almost like you could reach out and touch it. The colors were just incredibly bright and so low, really magical. But otherwise, my favorite thing of the season and every single tour is learning why each and every one of our tour members comes along, and then seeing how that journey unfolds for each of them individually and as a group, as we knit this little family together and get closer as we come to the end of the tour.
Well, I love that you mentioned the bus rides because I did the Rick Steves Scotland tour this year, actually. And one of my favorite parts was just the bus rides since it is such a beautiful, mystical landscape.
Absolutely. So lusciously green and incredibly different landscapes to travel through. So I'm really glad you got to enjoy that.
Oh, me too, me too. Well, Charlie, lucky you, gets to go to Edinburgh every time you guide a Rick Steves Scotland tour. So I counted it, and this year alone, you made it to Edinburgh 9 times on a Rick Steves tour. So as a frequent visitor, I was hoping you could walk us through your perfect day in Edinburgh.
Absolutely. So perfect day in Edinburgh starts nice and early, so you get ahead of the curve with regards to the crowds. Now we're going to start off in the new town over in Charlotte Square. So that's at one end of the new town development. Now, remembering new town is relative. New town was built in the middle of the 1700s in opposition to the old town, which was a medieval town. So that's the difference. So you walk through this neoclassical Georgian architecture down towards Princes Street Gardens, which are just gorgeous at any time of the year. Obviously, grab a coffee at one of the independent coffee places and then head into one of our galleries. So the National Galleries are just splendid and free to get into. So a brilliant place to go and check out, whatever the weather. After that, up towards the Royal Mile itself and descending down to the bottom of it, you'll find yourself at Parliament and, of course, the Palace of Holyrood House. So if you wanted to pop into either of those, that would be fantastic. You can get a really good value lunch in Parliament, in fact, in a cafeteria that's in there. You might rub shoulders with some of the parliamentarians, some of the politicians. But if you wanted to have a bit more of a free-form lunch, a great place to go is to our farmers market on a Saturday that's down in the grass market. I love popping in there. And once you've had your food, you're fueled up. So it's time to go up Arthur's Seat or Salisbury Crags. So that's our post-volcanic landscape. You climb up there in about an hour and just get incredible views from the top. And coming back down again, you must go and find a ceilidh. You might have done some exercise, but it's time to do a bit more. A ceilidh is an event where people come together. They dance to traditional folk music, maybe have a wee dram of whiskey. And once you've done that, so it's a little bit like a square dance or a line dance. I think you need to top the day off with a bit of a whiskey cocktail. There's a wonderful rooftop bar at the Johnny Walker Experience. So if you go to that, that's a wonderful place to have a little whiskey cocktail, an amazing view of the city, and then head back to your hotel.
Well, I think that was the perfect appetizer for tonight's show, Charlie. So thank you for walking us through your perfect day.
Absolutely.
And on that note, I will have Rick introduce us.
Edinburgh is the cultural heart of Scotland. Once a medieval powerhouse stretching below its mighty castle, today it's one of Europe's most festive and entertaining cities. Vibrant, well-organized, and friendly as can be, it's a traveler's delight. Edinburgh has two distinct halves, its medieval Old Town and its 18th century New Town. It's all split by a grand park. Its Royal Mile, which leads from the castle through the Old Town down to the palace, is one of Europe's great walks.
All right, well, Charlie, before we start our sightseeing, I am hoping that we can just give the viewers a quick orientation to Edinburgh. So we can start with its position in Scotland, and in the guidebook, Rick says, quote, where Edinburgh is where lowland culture, parentheses, urban and English, meets Highland style, rustic and Gaelic. Charlie, what do you think of this characterization, and can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. Its relationship to England through politics and trade and culture, it dates back to the time when the Angles and Northumbria was in the region and controlling the region. So we're talking about the 600s through to the 800s. So historically, there is context there for it to be connected to south of the border down in England as well. But of course, it is the platform, it is the portal through which many people experience Scottishness in its wholeness. So that being the identity of the Highlands as well. Maybe people don't have time necessarily to go up to the Highlands. So Edinburgh combines and curates the Scottish culture and also the characters and the identities that you meet along the way. Now, you'll feel lots of different cultures all over Scotland, whether it be north and south, lowland and highland, mainland and islands. But in Edinburgh, you get to taste a little flavour of them all.
Oh, perfect. Well, now just zooming in to the actual city itself. It does have two halves, the old town here and the new town. What can visitors expect from, both of these sides of the city? Where are they going to spend most of their time, and where might they want to look for a hotel?
So the great thing about Edinburgh is that it's just so very walkable. We've also got really good public transport links. So you don't have to stay in a particular area in order to see that area. You can certainly stay either in the new town or the old town, depending on budget and also your preference of what sort of architecture you'd like to be surrounded by. So as we've already heard, the new town is 18th century. So these neoclassical Georgian properties. We get an opportunity to stay in some of those. And one of my favorite places to stay in Edinburgh is in the new town or the West End, which is an extension of the new town. And also to stay a bit like a local, staying in some of these serviced apartments or an apart hotel gives you the opportunity to, cook your own food or think about doing your laundry and live a little bit like a local, which I absolutely love. Going into supermarkets all over the world is really revealing. So there's a great place that we stay in actually on the 8-day tour, and that's the Wild Apart Hotels, really close to the Grass Market, but just off, so nice and quiet. So when it does get busy and loud at the weekends with pubs and bars and restaurants, you are tucked away, which is great. And then the same can be said for the West End, which is, as I said, a bit of an extension of the new town. There's a great place called Dragon Suites, and they have serviced apartments that you can stay in, and they are really great quality, wonderful location, and you can pretend you're living in one of these Georgian properties for a few days whilst you're there, which I think is magnificent.
Well, I think that is a great tip to have a little oasis from the chaos of the Royal Mile. And now, just a couple more tips with, a classic at a glance slide. Charlie, can you go over what you think the best time to visit Edinburgh is?
Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on people's tolerance for crowds, I would say, and depends on the reason that you're going to Edinburgh. If you want to go during the festival season, August is your month. But then that's also going to be the most expensive and the busiest time of the year to be there. However, I would say lovely times of the year to visit, if you're not really concerned about being there for the festival season, would be to go in the shoulder season. So that really is April and October. And out of interest, I had more sunny days on my October tours this year than I did on my August tours. So don't necessarily let weather be your driving factor for an August break either.
Yes, that is a good shout. I went in August and I definitely paid for it. I didn't bring a good rain jacket, so.
Yeah, there's no such thing as bad weather, though, only a bad choice of clothing. And I bet you got a new one and then we're able to enjoy everything to the max.
100%. There are lots of retailers selling rain jackets in Scotland since they are definitely a necessity there. So, well, thank you for those tips, Charlie.
Absolutely.
And now I think we are all ready to start our tour of the Edinburgh Castle. So we are going to join Rick for a tour.
Mile, which leads from the castle through the old town down to the palace, is one of Europe's great walks. We start our visit where the city did, at the Edinburgh Castle, the fortified birthplace of the city over 1,000 years ago. This imposing symbol of Edinburgh sits boldly on a rock high above the city. While the castle has been both a fort and a royal residence since the 11th century, most of the buildings today are from its more recent use as a military garrison. Crowds gather as, traditionally, each day at 1 o'clock, the big gun is fired, giving the ships in the port something to set their clocks by. Why 1 o'clock and not noon? It costs the frugal Scots 11 fewer rounds. Your admission comes with a fine guided tour.
Well, welcome to the castle, ladies and gentlemen. It takes roughly about 20-25 minutes from the time we leave here to the time we get to the top. You'll all have climbed 414 feet. It's easy. I've done it 10 times a day already. Come on. And once you got through gate number 5, or if you got through gate number 5, we still had a surprise for you because we had gate number 6. And once you knocked down all these gates, you were basically in the lower defences, which means you're in the bottom half of the castle and you had plenty of room to fight. The castle has never been taken by force. It has only been taken under siege. Now, you see how much trouble went to keep the English out. But a bit more diplomatic now, we charge them money to come in. This is Mons Meg. It was given to James II by his uncle William, Duke of Burgundy, as a present in 1457. And the reason why he gave us it is because we were fighting the English, and he was fighting the English, so it was a common bond. But the cannon itself weighs 7 tons. It took 150 pounds of gunpowder to fire a 300-pound stone cannonball, less than 1 3/4 miles. It suited the Scotsmen. They had time to go and pick the cannonballs up, bring them back and fire them again. Well, this will be the last stop, ladies and gentlemen. And what you're going to see in the square now is the Great Hall, Mary Queen of Scots apartments, the Crown Jewels, and of course the Scottish National War Memorial. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Charlie. So the Edinburgh Castle is a bit like one giant museum made up of a bunch of smaller ones. So I was wondering if you had any sightseeing strategies that you would recommend to our viewers. You know, what should they prioritize and how should they manage the crowds?
Absolutely. Yeah, great questions. So first and foremost, make sure you get there early. The gates open at 9:30. So be there ready to rock and roll. Now, in order to do that, you need to book your tickets in advance and book a time slot. So make sure you're getting in there nice and fresh. Now, give yourself enough time to also get up there if you're staying quite a lot lower in the city, because it is a bit of a trek, but it's absolutely worth it. Now, once you get in there, I would recommend going all the way to the top at Crown Square, which is actually where in the video clip just here, they've finished their tour. On your way up there, you can pick up an audio guide. And if you've got some headphones with a jack, you can just pop those in or just listen to the audio guide by holding it to your ear. There is no longer a live guided tour included in your entrance with your ticket. So you go just pay a few pounds and you'll be able to get one of these audio guides, which is wonderful because it means you can take the castle at your own pace. Now, the first thing I would always recommend you go and see when you get up to Crown Square is the Honours of Scotland, or the Crown Jewels as the guide called them there. Now, these are beautiful, and I'll have you know, older than the English Crown Jewels. As you're going through Mary Queen of Scots' apartments after that, you'll also get to see the room where her son was born, and he became James VI, and then in 1603, James I of England, and therefore Britain. So what we've got is the beginning of Britain, and he was born in that room there. So that's a magnificent thing to be able to go and see as well. And on your way down, I highly recommend you check out St Margaret's Chapel. It's the oldest building in Edinburgh from the 12th century and quite magnificent. Very wee, but beautiful, and such a joy to be able to go into.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Charlie. And, now that we've tackled the castle, I think it's time to start our walk down the Royal Mile. And Rick called the Royal Mile one of Europe's great walks. Charlie, what do you think makes it so special? And again, how can visitors enjoy it in spite of the crowds?
So again, starting early in the morning is a really great thing to do. You'll find that if you're up and walking down the Royal Mile by sort of 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, that's a wonderful time to be able to witness it when it's almost still sleeping. A beautiful time to then do a compare and contrast when you come back up it later in the day, when there's the real hubbub of all the other tourists and visitors out and about. But one of the things I find absolutely incredible about it is the fact that on Castle Rock, we're on a structure, a post-volcanic structure, which is 340 million years old, naturally defensible position, and the very reason that any structure or defensible structure was up there to begin with. So 1,000 years ago is when people started to base themselves up at the top as having a fort up there. But what we've got to this day, as you walk down the Royal Mile from the castle, is you get to see architecture from the 16 and 1700s. So you start to see this layering taking place of both the geological grounding that gives purpose to why people are there in the first place, and then all the different human layers that we've put on top of it, understanding, going down each of the closes. It's really important to explore on foot when you're on the Royal Mile, so you can check these small little alleyways out.
Thank you, Charlie. And, on that note, I think we will join Rick on the Royal Mile for a tour.
Old Edinburgh's main drag, nicknamed the Royal Mile, leads from the castle downhill through the old town to the palace. This colorful jumble is the tourist's Edinburgh, a dense tangle of historic buildings, fun museums, and cultural cliches on sale. Edinburgh was a wonder in the 17th and 18th centuries. It was famed for its skyscrapers, they say the first anywhere, but also for its filth. It was once the most congested city in Europe. Its most wretched couldn't even afford candles. They lived in darkness. It said they knew each other not by how they looked, but by how they smelled. Medieval skyscrapers towered 10 stories and higher. Frontage on High Street was so limited that the buildings were narrow and tall, crammed shoulder to shoulder, with little courtyards called closes branching off. These closes were connected to the main drag by skinny lanes or even tunnels. 400 years ago, Edinburgh was nicknamed Aldreeky. The entire city was a black-stained mess of chimneys and reeked of smoke.
Well, I was happy to find that Edinburgh got over that reputation of smelling, but I wanted to spend just a couple more moments on those closes, just since I think, they have so many stories to tell, and they're all just full of their own little unique surprises. So, Charlie, I was wondering if you could tell us, a little bit more about what they can teach us about medieval life in Edinburgh, and also why they've become such an iconic feature of the Royal Mile today.
Yeah, most definitely. Or just before I jump into that, answering that question specifically, I would like to say that one of the best ways to do this Royal Mile walk is using the Rick Steves audio guide, because it really equips you to go and explore each of these closes that are off the Royal Mile itself. So us talking about them now is brilliant, but for folks that want to go and do it independently, a wonderful way to do that is with the audio guide, which is just fantastic. It's about an hour long, so it really is great length, and it'll take you all the way down the Royal Mile. Now, as you go and explore these closes, you'll get a real sense how it was overcrowded, such close proximity that these people were living in, and how different their norms were, their everyday lives were to ours today. So it really gives you a sense of that. I always think how resilient and robust people must have been, not just with their sense of smell, but with their whole experience of living so close with so many other human beings. They say about 60,000 people lived in an area which was 2 square miles, just a huge number of people, which is why you have these very tall buildings of the time, because they couldn't build out the way. They had to build up the way. So it really gives us a sense of how densely populated it was, but also each of the closes and courts and wines, they have names which really reference maybe the people that were living there. So they're named after someone specifically, or maybe they're named after the purpose or a trade that was down there. So here we've got the World's End Close. And the World's End Close was located essentially at the end of some people's world. You had to pay a toll to get in and out of the old town of Edinburgh. Now, some people wouldn't have had enough money to do that, and therefore their world ended at this place, right on the very city limits. So this is before the new town was built. So the World's End is what marks that, and there is a pub there today, which is a good one to go into as well. So that's the World's End Close. Some of the other ones were referencing different businesses that were set up there. So Old Stamp Office Close, that one, the clue's in the name with regards to that one. It's also where the Royal Bank of Scotland had its first offices in the 1700s. Now, you will also notice that some of these, I'll mention a couple of different names that are associated with them. So the Royal Bank of Scotland and Old Stamp Office Close. And that's actually because some of the closes and courts, they would change their name depending on who was living there at different times or what businesses were operating there. And that's fascinating because it meant that, you know, this is pre-post office registered addresses. You needed a group of people, and they were called caddies, that lived in the city and could navigate on behalf of people who were visiting or taking mail, because the addresses continuously shifted and changed depending on where the people were living. And that name, caddy, is actually therefore what carries across and gives the name into golf as well.
Oh, well, Charlie, I get the feeling that you would be an excellent person to have on a trivia team.
Yeah, yes, pub quizzes.
Yes. Well, I wanted to include these pictures just because when I was exploring the Royal Mile, I stumbled upon this secret garden, and I just found it so magical, and even more magical that it is also home to the witchery. So Charlie, can you tell us what's up with witches in Edinburgh?
Yeah, so just off Boswell's Court here on the right-hand side as you're going down the Royal Mile is the Witchery, and it's a very upscale, upmarket restaurant. And if you do tuck into here and go into this little secret courtyard garden space, at this time of the year, it's a fantastic time to go there because it's all decked out with loads of pumpkins for Halloween, or Samhain as we call it. So it's a great time to go and check it out right now, most definitely. But yeah, witches, witch trials, about 175 years of witch trials brought many women and men, in fact, about 2,500 were either burnt at the stake or drowned in the Norloch. And it's a really sad tale because, of course, these people weren't witches per se. They were maybe offering some healthcare support or some wisdom, and very often they were slightly older women. So it really was a way of attacking a portion of society, but it was really driven by the king at the time. So very problematic. And very grateful that we don't deal with those sorts of things to this day. But the Witchery is a great place to commemorate those that were lost at that time.
Thank you. And I definitely noticed walking around the old town, there's so many references to witches. And so I'm glad that they are getting their proper commemoration and tribute today. Well, let's see. We are now going to continue our tour down the Royal Mile.
The Royal Mile ends at the gates of Holyrood Palace, for 500 years the official royal residence here in Edinburgh. Rather than living in a blustery castle up on the rock, Scotland's royalty built this fine palace. Even today, when royalty's in town, you'll find them here. The best way to learn about Scottish history is nearby in the Museum of Scotland. It's amassed more historical artifacts than everything else I've seen in Scotland combined. This museum offers the best anywhere hike through the history of Scotland. The Kingdom of the Scots exhibit shows evidence of a vibrant early nation. While isolated by hostilities with England, Scotland managed to connect with the rest of Europe. How? Through trade, the church, and their Renaissance monarch, Mary, Queen of Scots. Scotland's long underdog struggle with England found inspiration from romantic and almost legendary Scottish leaders. Mary, Queen of Scots, educated and raised in France during the Renaissance, brought refinement to the Scottish throne. While she was imprisoned and executed by the English, her memory stoked the irrepressible Scottish spirit. 2 centuries later, another Scottish hero, Bonnie Prince Charlie, led the last hurrah in Scotland's long struggle for independence. This fan, showing Charlie in the company of classical gods, was an accessory at a grand party celebrating a short-lived Scottish victory over the English.
Charlie, so this uprising was a little bit more complex than just Scotland versus England. Could you give a little more background about Bonnie Prince Charlie and his cause?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bonnie Prince Charlie, otherwise known as Prince Charles Edward Stuart, he was the grandson of the deposed King James VII and II. So 7th of Scotland, 2nd of England. Now, Bonnie Prince Charlie wanted to return the senior Stuart line to the throne after the glorious revolution of 1688, which was orchestrated by the British establishment. So not the English, but the British establishment. And they put a Protestant on the throne. So we have a Hanoverian that comes onto the throne at this time. And what we have is an uprising between those who supported Prince Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie, and this new established king. Now, the followers of Bonnie Prince Charlie, they were called Jacobites because they were the followers of James, his grandfather, or Jacobus in Latin. And there were French and Welsh, English and Scots, including Highland and Lowlanders, fighting for this Jacobite cause. But there were also Scots in the British army. So they were fighting for the king. And it was therefore a civil war. And in fact, a family feud because the two royal families were related. So yeah, a little bit more complicated than England versus Scotland. But so very often does it get boiled down to that. But a visit to one of the sites associated with it will soon put that right.
Well, thank you for covering that off for us. I know it is a complex bit of history, so we really appreciate it. And yeah, Rick did mention that there's quite a few legendary Scottish historical figures, such as Bonnie Prince Charlie and Mary Queen of Scots. And the National Museum of Scotland is a great place to learn about them. But do you have any sites in Edinburgh where we can really connect with these two figures?
Absolutely. Yeah, most definitely. So like you said, the National Museum of Scotland is a superb place to check out the history. But one of my favourite places to connect the royal history is at the Palace of Holyrood House. So it's on this site that Mary Queen of Scots' private secretary, David Rizzio, was murdered in the 16th century in her private chambers, and you can visit those private chambers. Then if we look to the 18th century, it was in the Great Gallery here that Bonnie Prince Charlie, Prince Charles Edward Stuart, he hosted balls and audiences among the many portraits of his ancestors that still hang in that incredible space to this day. Now then cast our minds just back 2 years, bringing us right up to date. We have the late Queen Elizabeth, who of course died at Balmoral, and she was brought to the Palace of Holyrood House to lay in state in the throne room, which the tour goes through whilst you're there. So, and that was the night before she was taken up to St Giles, so the people of Scotland could pay their final respects to her. So it resonates all these different layers of history and storytelling that we think in some way are myths and legends, but actually they all resonate and overlap with each other here at this very site. The reality of history coming to the fore, everything that's gone before and everything that will be afterwards, all connecting at this space. Now, the other thing that really compares and contrasts at this very moment, when you're stood looking at the Palace of Holyrood House, you have this opportunity to turn around, and right on the opposite side of the road is the Scottish Parliament building. Now, this is an incredible postmodern architectural structure. So just aesthetically, it looks incredibly different. But what this gives us is that view forward into the future and the resonance of how Scotland is today governing itself and what that means to the people of Scotland. So we have all these different senses of our identity, ancient, mythological, intertwining with the real history and our politics of today. And then beyond that, we can then put them into the context in this image here. You can see Salisbury Crags in the background there. That's over 300 million years old. This weaving together of all these different ages and eras, it's a wonderful place to feel this great sense of time and connectivity, and also be humbled by the fleeting nature of time whilst we're here.
That was just such a good bow on top of that story, Charlie. So thank you for that. And, you really touched on something that I think is so special about Edinburgh. And it's, it's really an open air museum. And I think that's very apparent when you're standing between those two buildings.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, next we are going to visit a pub and then meet some of Scotland's favorite authors.
In the 1740s. Eventually, the Scots were quelled and united with England. Enjoying peace, stability, and English investment as the Industrial Revolution swept Britain, many hard-working Scots prospered. Cast iron and foundries were huge as Scotland became one of the most industrialized places in all of Europe. With the dawn of the modern age came leisure time, the concept of healthful sports, and golf, a Scottish invention. These golf balls from around 1820 were leather stuffed with feathers. For a different kind of leisure activity, I'm meeting Ken for a break at his local pub, Leslie. Sitting between a working class and an upper class neighborhood, it has two sides. Traditionally, the lads gather on the right around a great hardwood bar, and the more genteel folks would slip in on the left with its velvet settees, discreet ordering windows, and what they call a snob screen. The pub has a century of fun stained into its ambience. More than just a palace for drinking, it's a palace for conviviality. Scotland is also known for great literature. The Writers' Museum details the lives of Scotland's three greatest literary figures, Robert Burns, Sir Walter Scott, and Robert Louis Stevenson. Robert Burns was Scotland's bard. Even though Robbie, as he's lovingly called even today, dared to speak up for the common man and attack social rank, he was a favorite of 18th century Edinburgh's high society. They'd gather in fine homes like this to hear the national poet read.
Scotia's darling seat, all hail thy palaces and towers, where once beneath a monarch's feet sat legislation's sovereign powers.
Charlie, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about Robert Burns and how he became such an important figure of Scottish identity.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to, because Robert Burns, or Rabbie, as he's affectionately known, he was an 18th century writer, poet, wrote songs as well, and he really captured the essence of this time through the Scots language, and that's the real key here. This was the people's language, and his themes, well, they utilised romance of nature and the power of love, but they were also, as Rick alluded to there, anti-establishment, and for the everyman. So it was his use of Scots. That's what was really so transformative. He elevated this form of communication, and it is absolutely thanks to him that Scots, the language, is considered as such today. So it's protected in Scottish law as one of the national languages. So we've got English, Gaelic, and Scots. Some people used to refer to it as a dialect. Some people used to refer to it even worse as English spoken incorrectly. But it is now protected today, which is wonderful. And also this legacy. It's wonderful to see that we've got writers and poets who are writing in Scots this day. So the legacy of Burns. Now, we had a wonderful writer who was speaking at the Edinburgh Book Festival this year called Kathleen Jamie. She was the Macca for the last 3 years, which is the poet laureate up in Scotland. And she's just released this book, which is entirely written in Scots. So it's called The Keeley Hawk, and it has the English translation of the poems and then also the Scots. And it's just magnificent to read and really does allude to the fact that it's such an expressive language and is so very different to English. So it's this legacy that we have to thank Burns for, but the best way to hear it would be to see it spoken live. So to go to an event somewhere and to hear, or to maybe go to a Burns night or something like that.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up hearing it live, because my next question is, how can we go beyond the Writers' Museum for people who want to experience his work in real life? Is there anywhere we can listen to his poems or maybe dance to some of his music?
Absolutely, there is, definitely. So if you wanted, and if you were in a place, Scotland or otherwise, you can go to a Burns Nicht. So Nicht is the Scots word for night. So a Burns night is the celebration of his life on his birthday, the 25th of January. And they have these celebrations all over the world. When I used to live in Beijing, there was a Caledonian society there, and we all got together to celebrate Burns Nicht there, which was incredible. And equally in Switzerland, I lived there for a while, and we would get together and celebrate Burns Night there. So if you're not in Scotland, that doesn't mean you can't celebrate Burns Night, and you'll hear people singing and reciting his poetry. Someone will certainly do the address to the haggis, which is magnificent to hear. There'll be some haggis to be eaten, lots of whiskey to be drank, and dancing to be done as well.
Well, that certainly sounds like a good night, but for people who aren't in Edinburgh on Burns Night, is there a next best option? Are there any pubs or music venues where you would recommend people go to find an authentic Scottish experience?
Yeah, most definitely. So there's a couple of other places in Edinburgh that I'd like to mention. One is the Scottish Storytelling Centre, which is exceptional because they host storytelling evenings and spoken word events such as Loud Poets and Good Crack. So and Good Crack means like a good time. So I thoroughly recommend that you try and look out one of those. They tend to happen on Fridays all through the year. Ceilidhs are also hosted there, so a great opportunity to dip your toe into that. And at the moment, in fact, right now, the Scottish International Storytelling Festival is on. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, maybe this is the time of year that you'd like to go and listen to some of that spoken word, both from Burns and what's been inspired by his legacy today.
Oh, amazing, Charlie. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we still have a couple more authors to meet, so we will continue on.
A century later, Robert Louis Stevenson also stirred the Scottish soul with his pen. An avid traveler who always packed his notepad, Stevenson's settings are vivid and filled with wonder. Traveling through Scotland, Europe, and around the world, he distilled his adventures into evocative classics like Kidnapped and Treasure Island. Sir Walter Scott, who wrote the Waverley novels, including Ivanhoe and Rob Roy, is considered the father of the romantic historical novel. Through his writing, he generated a worldwide interest in Scotland and reawakened his countrymen's pride in their heritage. Scott is so revered in Edinburgh that his towering neo-Gothic monument dominates the city centre. With his favorite hound, Sir Walter Scott overlooks the city that he inspired and that inspired him.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
To enliven all this literary history, take the Edinburgh Literary Pub Tour.
I do
you're giving completely the wrong impression.
You'll follow the witty dialogue of two actors as they debate whether the great literature of Scotland was high art or the creative recreation of fun-loving louts fueled by a love of whiskey.
Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde. It was on the moral side and in my own person that I learned to recognize the thorough and primitive duality of man. My devil had been long caged, and he came out roaring.
Easy, Tiger. Getting a little bit carried away there. Thought you were going to pole dance for us there, Miss McGrain.
Okay, Charlie. So since we are on the topic of performances of all varieties, I thought we could devote a section of the show to Edinburgh's many, many festivals. So every August, multiple festivals converge in Edinburgh. And so I was wondering if you could give us a rundown of the lineup and what's on offer there.
Certainly, yeah, with pleasure. So you have the International Festival, and this is the highbrow festival. So it's where you see your theatre, your dance, opera, and this was established in 1947. And then concurrently to that, you also have the Fringe. And the Fringe's origins, that also resonates from 1947, and it was from 8 troupes that didn't get in to the international main festival, but still wanted the opportunity to perform to audiences and hopefully then get selected for future years. So the Fringe event now is just as worthy to go and see, and it has dance and comedy and all sorts of avant-garde performances to go and check out as well. Now, concurrently, you've also got the Book Festival. The Book Festival I went to several times this past year, where you get authors and poets like Kathleen Jamie speaking about their new books that they're bringing out, or speaking to pieces that have been inquired or brought to the fore in an academic context in the last 12 months. So it's a wonderful opportunity to hear authors speak about their own work. And then you've also got the Edinburgh International Tattoo taking place at the same time. So this has its militaristic context, where you have the marching bands with the pipes and the drums, a great performance, a cacophony of noise and colour, and it's all nestled within the front of the castle itself on the esplanade. Really quite a sight to behold. And then it's all finished off with a great firework display at the end of the night. So about 9,000 people can go and see it, and nearly every night in August. So about 220,000 people each year get to see the International Tattoo, which is quite something. I would highly recommend, however, that if you want to see the tattoo, that you get tickets well in advance. In fact, tickets have already been released for next year. August 2025 is going to be the 75th anniversary, and the theme is the heroes who made us. So if you want to get tickets, you can certainly have a pick of the tickets at the moment, all from sort of about £40, £45 up. If you wait until the week before, you'll just be left with whatever's remaining, and they could be the most expensive ticket, sort of £200. So right now, if you already have your trip to Edinburgh booked for next August, get in there early and get those tattoo tickets booked.
Thank you, Charlie, for those insights on tattoo. We get so many questions about that here at Rick Steves Europe in the Travel Center.
Yes.
So I'm thankful you could cover off on that. And I just wanted to take it back to Fringe Festival for a little bit, since unlike so many sites in Europe now, this is still a great place to be spontaneous. In 2024, I read they had 3,600 shows going at the Fringe. And so, this is a great place to just kind of show up and decide day of what you'd like to see. But, seeing that there has been so many shows to see over the years, I'm curious, Charlie, if anything really sticks out to you that you've seen in Fringe.
Oh, crikey, that's such a good question. So I was working at the Fringe quite a few years ago, and one of the shows I was working on was a feminist striptease. So the artist came on stage with no clothes on and then proceeded to get dressed. And that was excellent, turning the whole performance on its head. There's also some really wonderful burlesque shows that you can go and see, some great drag shows you can go and see. I stumbled across a dance performance, contemporary dance in a church. So it really is, but you just put yourself out there and you will find things to go and see. It's just a matter of being there and being up for it.
Oh, I love the take of the feminist striptease. That's so creative. And yeah, this picture on the right here, I was in Edinburgh this August and I was just walking up and down the Royal Mile collecting these pamphlets, and then I just decided what I wanted to see that day. So it's a great place to embrace your spontaneity.
Yeah, most definitely. Also, just to add in there, typically with the international festival, you have to book tickets quite far in advance. But if you're a solo traveler, very often there'll be individual seats at some of the busier performances. So that's always a good one to look out for. You may well be able to get in on something, even though it looks like it's nearly sold out. I often find that as a solo traveler, as a guide, I'm in town when these things are on and I can get into things just because I'm on my own.
Well, that is a great tip. Thank you. And after all of this festival talk, I'm feeling rather festive. And so I thought it was time we had a wee dram. Shall we, Charlie?
I
All
think
right.
that sounds like a very good idea. Yeah, most definitely. Okay. So have you tried whiskey before and what did you think about it?
Oh, I actually was or am a fan of bourbon. And so I was very excited to head to Scotland and sample some whiskey, but it is a bit intimidating since there are so many varieties.
We'll definitely talk about that. Definitely.
More to come. All right, well, let's see Rick have a taste of whiskey himself to start us off.
The Scotch Whisky Heritage Centre gives visitors an introduction to the world of whiskey.
If the whiskey could swirl like this.
The tour comes with a wee dram to taste and finishes in the gift shop. Serious connoisseurs of the Scottish spirit will want to pop into Cadenhead's Whiskey Shop. Founded in 1842, Cadenhead's prides itself on bottling fine whiskey from casks straight from the best distilleries, without all the compromises that come with more profitable mass production. So this is whiskey from the source?
Yes, this is like coming to the farmer to get your milk, rather than the supermarket. It's warts and all, and we like the warts.
So can a whiskey novice like me actually taste the difference?
Well, I would like to think so. I don't know classical music, but if I went to a bad orchestra, I think I'd notice a difference if I went to a good orchestra.
Okay.
Now, if I pour for you something directly from the cask, and you try that, without water at first, that's cask strength, straight from the barrel.
Whoa.
That's like a very hot bath. You don't get in there, you put your big toe in, so just take a little sip.
Oh, it's much more vibrant.
Yes. This is just water, the secret ingredient. This is going to open our whiskey up for us. Just like on a dry day after the rain has fallen, your garden is so much more aromatic. Never ice. Ice will close it down. Okay, now try that.
Oh, it's fresher.
Yes. Adding water to whiskey is essential. I can't tell people if they put pineapple juice in their whiskey that they're not enjoying it. If they are, but they're wasting quality whiskey if they are. Water is all you need.
Okay, Charlie. So as I was just saying, there are so many varieties of whiskey. It can be a little hard to know what to choose when you finally do get to the pub in Scotland. So what would you recommend a newbie to whiskey try for their first wee dram in Scotland?
This is a very good and important question, so I'm pleased you've asked it, because here I have a great tool that I use on tour, and it's a chart that has smoky whiskies at the top and then rich whiskies on this side next to me, delicate at the bottom, and light ones over here. So it gives you a way to navigate your whiskey journey. And that's what it is. It is a journey for everyone, and it takes you to a different destination. There is a whiskey for everybody. So using this chart, first and foremost, I would recommend that you start not at the rich and smoky side, but the light and delicate side. Then if you find one that you really like, you can then start trying the ones around it on the chart to expand your whiskey experience. And if you really don't like that end, go to the complete opposite side, and that will give you somewhere to start, because it's all very well asking somebody that works in a bar, what do you recommend? But it's such a personal choice. So it can be really tricky. So that would be my recommendation for equipping you with a tool. Now I have a technique for you. You will take your whiskey that you have just recently purchased, and in that dram, you'll swirl it around a little bit and take your first sip. The first sip is your acclimatization sip. So you move it around your mouth once you've taken the sip, typically for the number of seconds of the youngest whiskey in years that's in the whiskey, if it's a blended whiskey or if it's a single malt and it has a year statement on it, then you can see. So if it says 15 years on it, you will move the whiskey around your mouth for 15 seconds. That allows the pH levels on the inside of your mouth to acclimatize to the alcohol content of the whiskey. So it will taste a little bit burny this first time, then we swallow the whiskey. Our second sip is our second acclimatization sip. It's then in the third sip that the flavors will start to open out, and you'll start to really get to sense the variety of flavors and different tasting notes inside that whiskey. Now, if it is still really burny and you feel like it's just fire you're tasting, then we start to add water. So I typically, in my whiskeys, have 3 droplets, and really droplets of water, but you can start with 1 droplet and see how that opens the flavor of the whiskey out for you, and then keep adding them, having a little taste in between to get it to the point where it's comfortable and you can taste the flavors and not just the burn. So that's my technique for you to give it a whirl and have a good journey with your whiskey. Because if you just get one you don't like, you have a sip, it tastes like fire, you think, I hate whiskey, and that's it. The journey's over. So hopefully that gives you some more longevity in your exploration.
Oh, thank you, Charlie. And I love that it sounds like it really takes a little bit of patience, and you will be rewarded.
Absolutely. It takes at least 3 years and 1 day to create whiskey. So it demands of us a little bit of patience as well.
I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much for that lesson in whiskey tasting. And now we are going to take a little trip outside of Edinburgh to the nearby port town of Leith, where we will see the late Queen's Royal Yacht.
In the centre of Edinburgh, you'll find everything a traveller needs. The Waverley Bridge connects the old and new towns. It's a practical hub with the train station, tourist office, and departure points for tour buses, as well as public buses. So far, everything we've seen has been within walking distance, but our next destination is a short bus ride away in the port of Leith. This much-revered vessel, which Britain's royal family enjoyed on over 900 voyages, was retired in 1997. It's permanently moored here in Scotland, where it was built, and now welcomes visitors. This was the last in a line of royal yachts that stretched back to 1660. With all its royal functions, it took a crew of 200 to run the Britannia. The bridge is almost exactly as it was the day she was launched in 1953. Queen Elizabeth, who enjoyed the ship for 40 years, said, "This is the only place I can truly relax." This sunny lounge was the Queen's favorite. It had teak from Burma, the same phone system she was used to in Buckingham Palace, and it was just off the veranda deck. This deck was the favorite spot for outdoor entertainment. Ronald Reagan, Boris Yeltsin, Clinton, Nelson Mandela, they all sipped their champagne with the Queen right here. Now, when the Queen wasn't entertaining, she liked it quiet. The crew wore sneakers, they communicated with hand signals, and, at least on this part of the ship, they were required to get their work done by 8 a.m. The dining room, decorated with gifts given by the ship's many illustrious guests, enabled the Queen to entertain a sizable crowd. Her silver pantry was just down the hall. The drawing room, while rather simple, is perfect for casual relaxing among royals.
The piano, bolted to the deck, was played by Princess Diana. Royal family photos evoke fine times the Windsors enjoyed on the good ship Britannia.
So, Charlie, this really feels like an unusually intimate look at the living quarters of the royal family. So I was wondering, while we have this opportunity to explore the royal yacht, are there any hidden details we should keep an eye out for, or anything that might surprise us during our visit?
Well, I really love the combination of the regal and the royal with the homely. I think that combination is fascinating. And the family photos, as we're looking at here, they just really are beautiful. But also the way in which we just saw a moment ago, those fabrics, they're just so personal. It really feels like you've been welcomed into a home. And yet in that main dining room, you've got all these stately gifts from the nation's leaders. So I really admire how this combination comes across. But one place that I'm always overwhelmed is down in engineering. So when you get to see the engine room, everything is just so shiny, and it's done 1,000,000 nautical miles. So it's really worked hard, this vessel. But one of my secret gems is the petty officer's mess. It just feels like a really cozy pub, and their quarters are right next door. And I think that's a great little place to compare and contrast with upstairs, downstairs almost.
Oh, I love that. All right. Well, I think you also mentioned earlier that you really enjoyed having tea on this ship. Can you tell the viewers how they can make that happen?
Yeah, most definitely. So when you're there, there is a cafe on board that serves lovely afternoon tea. So you can go and have a cream tea on board the Royal Yacht Britannia. I mean, what could be better than that? Absolutely decadent.
It's not every day that you get to have tea like the Queen of England. So
Indeed. Yeah.
So thank you for that, Charlie. And now we are going to finish up the show by returning back to Edinburgh and exploring the new town.
Back downtown, the masses relax in the Princess Street Gardens. Once a lake called the Nord Loch, its water was drained, creating a park, now a favorite among locals.
The draining of the lake was part of a huge expansion of Edinburgh back in the late 18th century. This was a classic early example of urban flight, with the rich leaving an unlivably congested old town and building a magnificent new one.
Edinburgh's upper class now had a respectable district in which to promenade. The street plan was a logical checkerboard grid plan, in tune with the Age of Enlightenment.
Back when the 13 American colonies were fighting King George III, a new revolutionary style of architecture was popular all across Europe. On the continent, they called it neoclassical. Britain named it Georgian, after her king. Edinburgh built an entire new town based on this style.
Georgian Edinburgh was a parade of elegant symmetry and classical ornamentation. The shiny new Edinburgh was also part of a PR campaign designed to promote the notion that Scotland was a respected and integral part of the United Kingdom. The streets and squares are named after the British royalty. George Street, 20 feet wider than the others, so a 4-horse carriage could make a U-turn, was the main drag. Between Queen and Princess Street, Thistle and Rose Streets were named for the emblems of the two supposedly happily paired nations.
Okay, Charlie. So we have not spent much time in Newtown during this show. So I was hoping you could walk us through some of your recommendations for Newtown. How do you like to spend your time there?
Yeah, most definitely. So I've mentioned the National Galleries already, free to enter, and a really wonderful, not just architecturally, but the artwork in there also inspires you to go and explore the rest of Scotland, because you have these gorgeous landscapes that are all resonating with the Highland culture and landscape itself. So highly recommend that you go in there. But also the Georgian House is a great visit. So if you are interested and love your period dramas like Bridgerton and Downton Abbey, then this is a property that is managed by the National Trust for Scotland. And they have a really great team in there who do the interpretation, sharing information, and really supporting your visit. So it's great to support that trust, looks after our built heritage and our natural landscapes, but it's a great place to go and dip your toe into what the interiors of these Georgian properties would have looked like when they were built and the wealthy moved across to the new town. I would also highly recommend that you pop into some of the old banks that are on George Street. Now, one of these is called the Dome, and it's a very lovely restaurant. Another is called the Standing Order, and that's more of a everyday sort of pub that locals will go to after work. It's part of the Wetherspoons brand, so it's great to go in there, get great value, drinks and dinner. But both of these properties are inside old banks, so architecturally they are fabulous to be inside and really gorgeous spaces to be inspired by, that really resonates with this Georgian architectural period as well. So definitely those places would be my recommendations.
Thank you, Charlie. And I love your idea in general of just using art to inspire the rest of your travels. So thank you so much for sharing, and just thank you overall for a fabulous tour of Edinburgh. I know you've certainly sparked some inspiration and curiosity in our viewers just based off of the questions we've received. But before we get to those questions, I am going to do a quick word from our sponsor. And tonight, our sponsor is the Rick Steves Audio Europe app. This is an app that is filled with self-guided walking tours and radio interviews for destinations across Europe. All you really need to do is download the app to your iPhone or Android, and you can have Rick himself guide you around some of Europe's top museums and top sites. And you'll, receive cultural insights and historical insights along the way. So really cool resource. And again, it's free. And as Charlie mentioned, there is a walking tour of the Royal Mile on it. So I highly recommend going through that library. Okay, now on to the question and answer portion of the show. All right, so starting us off, Cynthia is wondering, when and where is the best time for Highland Games?
Ooh, so that's also in the summer months, July and August. So they would typically be a little bit further out in the Highlands, not that close to Edinburgh itself. And you'll be able to find resources online. If you search for a particular region, they'll be able to tell you a particular date for each region. They're not all on the same day throughout the Highlands. That varies. So make sure you do your research and make sure your trip overlaps with the one that you specifically would like to go to.
Oh, good tip. That is a good way to avoid some heartbreak.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the most famous of all of them is the Braemar Gathering. And that's the one that the royal family would go to next to Balmoral.
Wow, that is quite the backdrop. Okay. Gary is wondering, do cruise ships come into Edinburgh add to the crowds of tourists? So is there any problems with cruise ships?
So you definitely do get cruise ships in, and one way to really avoid the rush that you find in that central part of the day is to go out early, and then you can beat them to the sites that you'd like to go to. But you do certainly see guides along with big number boards and people with stickers on, certainly in the high season. There is also a way you can check online which dates they're coming in. So if you're traveling independently, you'd like to try and avoid that, you can have a little look at when that would be as well.
Thank you. And Robert is wondering what the origin of the name tattoo is. So what's the story behind, military tattoo?
So it's not to do with having a tattoo on your arm or another part of your body. It actually comes from a practice from the Low Countries, where you would drum at the end of the evening to bring all the military back in to go to bed, essentially, get them out of the pubs and get them back into the barracks. But these days, that drumming is more of a performative element. And therefore, we have the pipes and the drums doing these incredible marching choreography pieces, and it really is a sight to behold. But it was an efficient way of getting your military personnel back in at the end of the day.
Susan is wondering if there are any tasty treats that we should be aware of before visiting Edinburgh.
Oh my gosh, there are so many tasty treats. So crikey, there are dining opportunities. Of course, eating haggis is something which many people would recommend as a must do. Did you have haggis when you were in Scotland, Emily?
I am ashamed to say that I chickened out of haggis.
So I have a strategy for you the next time you come. So if you don't 100% feel like you want to try haggis, you can have vegetarian haggis. And then you can go home and tell all your friends that you've had it. So that's one way to enjoy our culinary delights. And it's always served in its most traditional format with neeps and tatties, which are turnips and potatoes, and a whiskey cream sauce. But these days it's made in all different sorts of ways. So you could just have it as a starter, and they make little croquettes. Sometimes they're deep fried, and you can have it instead of having it as the main, you can have it as the starter, maybe share it with a traveling buddy, and then you're not compromising a whole meal in case you don't like it. But chicken balmoral is the most traditional sort of meal you'd have at weddings and big family parties. And that would be with the chicken stuffed with the haggis inside. Now, maybe 20 years ago, Scotland didn't have a fantastic name for food. But these days, there are some incredible places to eat. And I would highly recommend so many places on the Royal Mile, in the New Town. I mean, the Dome, which I've already mentioned, does great food. So that could be a wonderful place to eat in a really elegant environment and context as well. The Witchery, we've mentioned already. That's quite high end, but excellent quality Scottish fusion fare, I would say. And another really wonderful place is the Devil's Advocate. They do whiskey tasting flights, incredible food just off the Royal Mile, and whiskey cocktails too. So those are just a couple of nuggets of places I would recommend. And we've already talked about the rooftop bar up at the top of the Johnny Walker Experience. So they do food and drinks as well and have a fantastic view. I have actually got right next to me here one of our sweet treats. So this is a caramel Tunnocks caramel wafer. And these are delicious. We love our sweet treats in Scotland. So here is one of those. You can also get a Tunnocks tea cake, which is like a biscuit at the bottom with a marshmallow, and then the whole thing is coated in delicious chocolate. So made by the same company, and both of those are really worthwhile diving into. And I've also got my favorite brand of shortbread here as well. So this is Crystal's shortbread. It's quite tricky to find, but if you're in Scotland, Crystal's shortbread is definitely the one to go for.
I was hoping you would bring up shortbread there, Charlie. That was definitely my favorite treat when I was in Scotland.
It's your weak spot.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so I think we have time for one more question. And Joy is wondering, what are some good day trips out of Edinburgh?
Ooh, okay. So day trips out of Edinburgh. It depends if you're flying, maybe you're flying through Edinburgh and you want to go. So there's some really long day trips that you can do there. I mean, have we got any Outlander fans out there? I am sure we must have. So there's some really good day Outlander trips that you're able to do, both in the city walking tours, but also trips that take you out of Edinburgh to some of the filming sites. So for our Outlander fans, that's definitely one that I would recommend. You can also head down towards Galashiels. That's a great area to take the train down to. And you can see the home of Sir Walter Scott down there, Abbotsford, which is a great place to go and check out. There's so many wonderful places. So you could also take a day trip. It doesn't need an entire day, but one of my favorite areas that's a little further out of town is Portobello. And you can take the bus from Edinburgh. It takes about half an hour to 40 minutes, and it's where the beach is. So very different energy to Edinburgh itself. Very creative, lots of independent cafes and brunchy vibes, and you're at the beach. So for those of you that want to go for a little wild swim, that would be a great place to go and do that in the sea.
I had a wild swim in Oban, and it was so magical. I had no idea there were white sand beaches in Scotland. So yeah, keep the wild swim on the back burner. It's a great activity.
I highly recommend it. I swim on every single tour when I go to Iona. So I'm completely with you on this. White sand beaches, turquoise sea. It might be a bit brisk, but it's good for you. It's character building. I think that's what they say.
Yeah, certainly. It looks like the tropic, but doesn't quite feel like it. Okay, well, Charlie, thank you so much for joining us on Monday Night Travel this evening. It has been such a pleasure to have you. You are such an excellent storyteller, so I'm so thankful that you could join us to just bask in the glory of Edinburgh.
Oh, it's been an absolute joy to be able to talk all things Edinburgh with you, and thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you again, and I hope that you are able to get some much-deserved sleep.
Thank you very much. I'll simmer down now. It might take me half an hour.
Yes, all right. Well, thank you again, Charlie, and good night to you. And I also just wanted to thank all of you for tuning in and spending your Monday night with us. And I wanted to remind you once more that we have published our November shows through November 18th on our website. So that would be a great thing to check out after the show and see what we have coming down the line. We also have Lisa Friend joining us next week, and she will be doing a report on her recent trip to Puglia. So if you are a fan of the backdoor travel content that we've been doing recently, this is an excellent show to tune in for. All right, well, that concludes our show for the evening. Thank you again for joining us this Monday night, and we'll see you next week. Happy travels.